Welcome to the Pushing Through Loss podcast. I'm your host, Kalila Green Siciliano. In this weekly podcast, we're here to offer support, understanding, and hope to those who have experienced the pain of pregnancy loss. We'll share stories, insights, and expert advice to help you find your inner strength warrior. Let's begin this journey together. All right. Well, I have Amy here with me today, and I wanted to bring Amy on. I was so excited when she said that she wanted to be interviewed because we share a common history, and I'm going to let her go into that. So, Amy, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so let's see. My husband and I have been married going on 13 years next month of October as we're recording
Congratulations.
this. Thank you. And we have 5 kids. I feel like this is the perfect context to kind of say the right number. You know, it's always the question of like, do I say how many are living and that you can see, or do I include my lost babies? And so we have 3 girls and then 2 boys in heaven. One I miscarried around 7 weeks, and Gideon, who I think we'll share a little bit about in our discussion today, he was stillborn at 32 weeks. And so, yeah, I'm a stay-at-home mom, homeschooling mom. We are a Christian family, so church life and, you know, our faith has been a huge part of our story, and kind of some trauma things, as we've experienced some spiritual abuse that kind of meshed in with my grief, which I didn't realize would be triggered in some of this stuff with Gideon's story. And so, it's just been an interesting journey as far as us and our background and all of that. That's just a little bit a brief history.
I love that you included both of the boys that you lost. I think, like you said, it's such a hard thing to say when someone says, "How many kids do you have?" Because you want to say how many you should have. But there's also that part of you that's like, does the person really want to go into that discussion of how many kids I've lost versus how many kids are alive?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely always a hard one. And I change it each time. I kind of gauge, like, you know, are they genuinely asking because they're interested, or are they just making conversation? If they're just making conversation, then I probably won't mention anything. And even times when I am wanting them not to ask me more questions, I'll make it awkward and be like, yeah, just throw it out there.
It's definitely one where, as I feel like as I get farther away from the actual miscarriage, that I can sometimes have more of a sense of humor about it. So like you said, like when you want to make somebody feel uncomfortable, it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um Tell me a little bit about, if you're comfortable, both of your losses. If you want to talk more about Gideon, since I know that was how we actually met, was after that loss. I would love
Mm-hmm.
to hear about that, but whatever you're comfortable with for both of them or just for Gideon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was the grief for each of them was like so different. And so I would say it was almost 6 years ago that I had my miscarriage. And it was totally unexpected because we've been blessed, I would say, to have a pretty easy conceiving journey. We didn't, if I wanted to get pregnant, we just went for it. And within the first 2 months, I'd be pregnant. And so because of that, we were pretty confident sharing with people very early. And at the time, we had been serving in a ministry, and in our church, there had been so many deaths. We had to call all of our members and tell them, like, so and so has passed away over and over. It was like just, had gotten to be a lot. So when we found out we were pregnant this time around, we, called each of them individually and we said, this time is good news. So that was the exciting part. And then to miscarry 2 weeks later after telling them, I like could not look at them again. Like that was a kind of a one of the complex parts of the grief, right? Like there's that part of like I'm mourning as a mother and I wanted this baby, but then there's that aspect of like, oh, I told people and I got them excited too, and now they're disappointed, or how's it affecting them? And so I remember, my husband and I, we were pastors, and I didn't even show up to the church for months. I'm like, I'm supposed to be there. So then there was a lot of shame with that and everything. But I would say the miscarriage, because I had not ever experienced any kind of significant loss like that in my life, like I don't know of anyone except for a great grandmother who died of old age, like that had passed unexpectedly. And so because of that, I kind of felt this in my faith, I felt like this obligation that because I was doing something for God, he was going to bless me and make sure everything was good. And so when it didn't go that way, when I prayed, like, God save my baby, please, even though I knew it would take a miracle as I was going through the miscarriage, like for that to even happen, I felt very much betrayed and like, what in the world? This wasn't what I agreed upon. Like, I give to you, you give to me. I thought that's how it worked. And so, and I didn't realize that that's what I believed until that loss of like, wow, I had a very, off perspective of this dynamic of who God is and how he works. And anyway, so that, I was very much depressed. I was very much like disconnected from everything. And I think what I noticed between that grief and the grief with Gideon is like, it was more immediate. My grief was there. It was in your face. It was not, there was no hesitation. Like it was, if I needed to cry, I cried, like all of that. I didn't show up to things and I didn't care. Like, and then with Gideon, excuse me, who was stillborn August 13th of last year now, we were 32 weeks. I had just gone to an appointment the week before. We were going to be going on vacation. And so I had just gone to the appointment. And on my way to the appointment, I remember saying to my husband, I feel like he hasn't really been active today. So, but I had a lot of anxiety because of the former miscarriage and stuff, and pregnancies after that. And so then I was like, well, maybe it's just me in my head, like worrying for no reason. And so when we got to the appointment, she found the heartbeat, no problem. So I was like, see, it's just me in my head. Like there's nothing. And I remember leaving that appointment just so thankful again with God of like, I can trust you. I can trust that you got it. All this, which I can trust him. But it was like this, everything's fine. I just need to relax. And it was in that week, we left that appointment the next day, went on vacation. And it was in that week where it was like, he's still not as active as he usually is. Maybe he's just, the whole like, he's running out of room in there, right? That those things that we hear. And it was when my sister-in-law said, hey, the next time he's really active, can you let me know? I'd love to feel him kick. And I was like, okay, get me a large Coke or something, because he hasn't been really active this week. And we need to see if something gets him going. And that was when I started paying more attention of like, wait, nothing's helping him. And yeah, so the middle of the night, I was like 3 a.m, the morning we were supposed to head back home. We were in North Carolina. I just woke up feeling like, just like something's wrong. I don't know, but it was this back and forth. Is it just my anxiety or is something up? I don't want to get a huge hospital bill for it to be nothing. Like, and I hated that was even part of my thought process, like worrying about it financially. But then I texted my midwife and she was like, well, you could wait till you come back and we can do an ultrasound, like get a neonatal stress test, I think is what it's called, done, or you can go in and just get it checked. She was like, I'd feel more comfortable if you went in. And so I was like, okay. So I woke my husband up and I said, let's go. And we went. And then then it begins the whole narrative, as most lost moms experience, of like, we're so sorry there's no heartbeat. Like they went an hour really trying to find, were holding out as much hope as possible, turning me every which way. And as a birth worker, that's something you and I share in common. Like I already kind of knew, okay, by now they should have been able to hear it, like something's up. And, I was holding it together up until the midwife came back in after the ultrasound. And she was like, I'm so sorry, but there's no heartbeat. And it was just like, I just lost it. So in the room, I lost it. And then after that, it was like I just disassociated. Like, okay, now it's funeral arrangements. Now it's letting everyone know. Now it's logistics of everything. And I stayed in that for a while. Like at home, I was safe enough to be a little more emotional, but I still had to take my girls to co-op. I still like it. This was August. School was starting, life goes on. Like, and so there's so much I had to go through the emotions about. And so that made it even more challenging to face my grief. And it wasn't until Mother's Day, in Mother's Day was when like the delayed grief kind of set in of like, it all really was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Like, this isn't working for me. And thankfully, I was connected with the Family Project. And they, I was able to talk with Noelle more a little bit, share with her what was going on for me. And they kind of guided me. And yeah, I got some extra help from there. And that was like a game changer. And I mean, it's not all better, but now I can recognize it of like, okay, this is here. The grief is here. Let me sit, take that time out and just be present with it. And that's okay. But as I mentioned earlier, some of that delayed grief was intertwined with kind of a separate ministry that we were part of that was triggering some past trauma that I hadn't fully healed from. And so the shock of the delayed grief was like, why is it this intense now instead of like, this was more fitting when he died? Like it should have been then. Why wasn't it this intense? And so as I went through counseling and kind of parsed it out, we were able to kind of pinpoint of like, this is what's triggering that. And because the grief of Gideon is the more obvious, that seemed, my mind was going to that, like, am I not, taking enough time for him? Like, am I not mothering him or doing things to remember him or that kind of stuff, which is, and we identified that there were some other things. And it was like, oh, it brought such relief to know, like, I feel like I'm managing the Gideon grief well. It's this other part that I hadn't even addressed that kind of came up. But yeah.
First of all, I think it's such an amazing asset that you got in touch with Noelle Moore. She is a phenom, and for the reason that she founded the Finley Project is heart-wrenching. For anybody who wants to learn more, go to the Finley Project. I think it's finleyproject.com. But she lost her daughter at 30 days old after she was already born.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
she created this whole 7 steps of holistic healing to be able to help moms going through stillbirth and infant death. So I'm so grateful that you were able to get to her. But tell me a little bit, I think from your husband's perspective, if you can, and from your kids' perspective, how they also dealt with it.
Yeah, so we were planning a home birth with Gideon. And so that's like a different dynamic when you're able to have your children home with you and they get to be part of it. And, as I mentioned earlier, I had 3 girls, 12, 10, and 6. So they're all like of age where they're aware of what's happening. They were ready to be super involved in the birth, like who's going to cut the umbilical cord, who might want to help catch. Like they were just, obviously the children of a birth worker. And so when everything happened, when I had the miscarriage, my oldest was 5, I want to say. And I remember when we told her, she went upstairs to her room, slammed the door, and she was so angry. And I didn't expect that, So then I felt like, such shame and guilt for telling her so early, like we should have waited or something. But we're very much like, we believe that life believes at conception or begins at conception. And so that's where we kind of try to approach it from of like, let's celebrate it while we have it. And so, but you always think that, and you never expect to lose that life, right? So there's that dynamic. But with Gideon, we had made it so far, and even to the point of like, there's the reality of, had we noticed something earlier, we could have potentially, maybe had a C-section or something, or had induction or that kind of thing, and potentially saved his life. But we'll never know, this side of eternity. And so for them, it was very difficult. They did come. They wanted to come to the hospital after he was born. And so we did have them come, and my eldest held him for like a minute, and then, she had to step away. It was a little bit too much for her to see him like that. My middle daughter, I think, was the most kind of connected. And so she kept wanting to hold him. And then my youngest, she held him for a little bit, but it wasn't fully, fully clicking. Like, she understood he wasn't coming home and that kind of thing, but wasn't fully grasping everything at the time. And so for my husband, I mean, it was very much a shock for him. This was for sure with the baby that we miscarried. We didn't know the baby's gender since it was so early. So we just imagined that it would have been a boy. But this one, we knew it was a boy. So he knew it was his son that he was losing. And so that was, just devastating for him. But then also, he has to keep it together for me and for our girls. Like, and then he still has to go to work. Like, there's no leave for him in that sense. So it was a lot of him trying to navigate that, managing the funeral arrangements, because I just kind of left that in his hands. But even still, even last night, there was a moment we ended up getting a dog a few months after losing Gideon, just for our family to comfort. And the dog was laying, he's about 5 pounds, he's tiny, and he was laying on my husband's chest. And my husband just had this moment of like, this is how all my babies, slept on me. And it was, we just had this moment of like, man, this would have been Gideon, but it wasn't, it isn't. And so, we find ways to remember him, to let the grief come when it comes. But over time, it's gotten easier. The one thing I will say is, I feel like the miscarriage loss was a little bit harder for him, because no one asked him how he was doing. Like, it's, I guess, a little bit easier for people to recognize that he might be grieving, given that we had a whole funeral for Gideon. But with the miscarriage, it was like, there was still that disconnect for people. Like, they had just found out we were pregnant, and now they're finding out we miscarried. So they didn't have that same kind of bond. And so for him, everyone would come to him, how's Amy doing? How's Amy doing? And he'd be like, what about me? It was my child too. And so that was really difficult. I remember him talking about then. But thanks to like the support group that we did, the heal group and all of that, it was good for him to connect with other dads who really understood.
Something that you said that I think is really important is that you found ways to remember Gideon. And I'm sure that you also sort of include the first miscarriage, even though, like you said, you weren't 100% sure what the gender was. Two questions in that. Tell me more about what you've done to remember them. But I know that you're so connected with your religion, as am I, but being on the other side, I'm Jewish. So I know, what areas we have, what laws we have to commemorate lives, or especially in miscarriage, there are no laws to commemorate miscarriage. Is there anything, this is the second part of the question, is there anything in Christianity that sort of dictates what you can or can't do after a miscarriage or a stillbirth?
Yeah. So can you say the first part of the question real quick again, too?
Tell me more about what you've done to memorize or to remember each of the babies, and to really bring them as a part of your family with your girls every year.
Yeah. So as far as within Christianity, we attend a Reformed congregation, so it's more like Calvinist, more traditional, I would say. And there's nothing, if there was going to be anything within the Protestant background, it would be them, and they don't have anything that I've ever heard spoken about as far as how to handle it. the main thing is it's more of like understanding that, the baby, the life begins at conception, and honoring that child from the moment we're aware of it. And so they're very much of like, if you want to, that's something that I appreciated, was like, if you wanted to have a funeral or whatever, I think if we would have miscarried, even if we wanted to do something, our church would have been super supportive, and because they understand, they have that value on life, or that same perspective on life. And so, but there's nothing as far as like religiously that we would have to do or that we couldn't do necessarily when it comes to the losses of miscarriage or stillbirth. Perhaps, there is some like debate on whether you should bury or cremate, which I'm sure you might have some as well on that. And so, I always thought that, like I've said to my husband, if I die, just cremate me. Like I've never been one to like bury. And again, that comes down to financial situations. But with Gideon, like there was something about the idea of, and trigger wording, but like just thinking through that of, my baby already went through so much, I don't know that I feel comfortable cremating him. And there was a moment in like the funeral preparations when we found out how much it was going to cost for the graveside, and like all the things that was one funeral home, that I was like, we might only have the option to cremate him, like, because we can't afford this. Thankfully, we reached out for support, and family and friends in the community just blessed us financially to be able to do a funeral and bury him at our church cemetery. And so, that was very meaningful. But there is some view on that. So there's some view on like, and not to cremate would kind of be the perspective, but to preserve that body so that, when resurrection comes. But other than that, I can't think of anything. So things that we have done, my husband, with our miscarriage, we were completely unaware of things. I didn't even have it in my mind to like honor this child or anything like that, even though it was a significant loss for me. But this concept of like still trying to remember them, he had that. Like it was this natural instinct for him, which I value so much now. And so, we did do like a little burial service for the remains, because I miscarried at home, and we light a candle. Some of the family members will light a candle for, we named the baby Josiah. And so they'll light a candle for him, or they'll remember him in that way. And then now for Gideon, we definitely have more ways that we remember him. Friends and family have sent like pieces of jewelry. I ended up getting this, like, if you're listening, you won't be able to see it, but I do have this breast milk ring that I had made just to remember, a way of remembering him. And I had necklaces made for each of our children as well, so that they would have something to remember him by. We go to, because his gravesite is at our church, we're able to go weekly and see him. And I got a weighted bear, which like made a huge difference. I wish I would have had it sooner, like, because there was just like this desire, as you may know, of like longing to be holding a baby, and you're not. And it like that whole empty arm, I think there's like empty arm syndrome or something. There's a whole thing about it. I didn't even know that was a thing until I was like living that out. And it was one night, I remember I wrapped up one of my daughter's stuffed animals and put a weight in it so that I felt some kind of pressure, and that was the only way I could sleep. And I felt so embarrassed. Like I did not want anyone to know or see. And my husband woke up and he saw me that way, and he like readjusted everything so that it would be in, still in my arms as I was sleeping. And I kind of woke up to him doing that. And he was like, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. Like, you do what
I
you
love
need
your
to do.
husband.
But it was I'm just so thankful for like how instinctually like he's been able to, be so supportive in that way. But it was just so much pain, like, and those are it's those dynamics of like, it's not just you're grieving, but you're also navigating, like, if you had previous trauma that you're navigating through at the same time when you have such a significant loss. And, that's part of why, I think you with doing this podcast and the work that you do, and also with like, as my birth work, as I pursue that, of just wanting to be present with moms as they navigate that. Because unless not in every situation, I'll leave room, but generally speaking, unless you walk through it, you just do not understand like how challenging and unknown and scary the whole process can be.
Definitely. And I think first of all, it's really beautiful how your husband was able to step up and even help you remember the first baby that you lost when you were completely unsure as to what to do, or even that that was a thing. And the fact that he was able to support you and that you were able to support him also. I mean, it's something where he lost two children also, even though you were the one that were carrying them. To be able to be there for him is really special. Um, and I think you touched on my last question just for a moment, because like you said, we're both in the birth working arena. Tell me, in your opinion, why it is so important for people to share their pregnancy loss stories.
Oh man. Just because sadly it happens way more often than we realize. Like even as a birth worker, like when I walk through the loss of Gideon, like from beginning to end, quote unquote, like the 6 weeks postpartum, even like the whole thing, there was so much that I was learning too as a birth worker of like, I was totally unequipped for this scenario. I wouldn't have known how to advise them, like how to answer questions, how to help them with funeral arrangements, like, and so talking about it and sharing those things, you know, even if someone will never experience the loss, which is like the ideal, but the reality of the 1 in 4, one in four women will experience a loss at least once in their lifetime. That, hearing those stories, and I understand that there's this fear of like, in our work, there's this fear of, you don't want to put fear into a mom because it's going to make her tense up during her birth, or, she should only visualize good births and good outcomes. And I get that. Like, I used to be all for that. But now I'm like, yeah, but bad things happen too. Like, and it would be, I feel like now as a birth worker, it's almost irresponsible to not at least have that conversation once in your entitled prenatal, discussions, to kind of have a game plan of how you would want to move forward in that before you're in it. And so there are things that I think in having these conversations and people having access to hearing these stories, it helps, that mom who may potentially experience it to be able to prepare for, or think through like, how would I handle that, if that happened to me? And, or to gain perspective of, wow, I didn't even know that that's probably what my sister went through, but hasn't been able to feel safe enough to share that or something. There's so many details that some people just will keep to themselves, and that feels safest for them, and others it is better. Like, I am a verbal processor. I have to be able to talk things out. And so that has helped me to heal. People, when I talk about Gideon, people will just be in shock and sometimes in tears, that I can talk about it and not be shedding a tear. And, that it's because of therapy, obviously. And, because of being able to hear other people's stories, of being able to see other people like still survive through it and even get pregnant after it. Like, that's where I'm, we're in the same chat group with some of our other lost mom friends, and like, in the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't think I ever want to like go risk going through this again. But then you see these, other moms choosing to go through it again, and like, and these beautiful redemptive stories. And it's just like, I just think it's so amazing, the privilege and like the walk that we as women get to kind of have. It's scary and it's uncomfortable and it's like, oh, so painful, but then there's so much beauty that can come with it too. And that's the beauty of like sharing about it too. My hope is that one day our daughters, as they're walking through it, either themselves or with their friends, like that this will be something of, this is an unfortunate facet of another variation of normal. And we walk this too, like we do this too.
It's definitely one where in our culture, we don't talk about the bad things. We don't talk about death. We don't talk about sickness. We don't talk about how it affects you. And I think that by, like you said, bringing conversation to this and making sure that as a birth worker, you do bring it up with your moms, and even knowing that your girls might be in the same situation as they get older and they begin to have kids, knowing that you can empathize and be there for them if, God forbid, they should ever go through a miscarriage or a pregnancy loss, it just means so much. And it's something where you said it perfectly, that it just, we need to talk about it because we need to make sure that other people understand it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Given that obviously we will walk with grief for the rest of our lives, it's just something that is always going to be there. It's always going to sort of be in the back of your head. Gideon will never leave you, and your first baby, Josiah, will never leave you. Tell me in this moment, 3 things that you can find that you're grateful for.
Mm. Well, specific to like the whole experience, definitely with Josiah, I'm grateful because although it was such a devastating thing to lose him, especially so early on, he kind of helped us, that loss helped us to recalibrate like our family's priorities. And so we went from, being so ministry minded, which within the Christian faith, like that's kind of applauded, to serve others. But we got to a point of like where matters of integrity were being put to the side, not prioritizing our family. And so, we believe that second to our individual relationship with God and to our relationship with each other as husband and wife, our family is next, and then ministry after that. And that was completely out of order. And so the loss that we experienced with him really made us go deeper in our faith and grow as a family in that, and kind of choose to what seemed like kind of not a good decision to some. We stepped away from that ministry. We walked away, and it's actually been like the best thing for our family in these last 5 years. And so we're very much grateful for that. That's something that almost every day, like we're reflecting on, like, man, if God, we hate the circumstances that led to it, like that got us to that point, but we are so grateful for that. With losing Gideon, I wish that I could have learned it differently, but I am grateful for how it's informed me to serve other women, and to really be able to empathize and like sit with them and the reality of that grief, and understanding like it's not as simple of like, oh, you can just have another baby, like some of the things people will say. And so I am grateful to have more knowledge around that as a birth worker. And that's a perspective that I tried to really navigate. As it was the difficulty of grief, I really try to navigate the whole process too, of like, as I'm mourning, what can I be taking with me to help someone else from this? And I'm grateful that, it strengthened my marriage. There's a lot of stories we hear of like families who split, like couples who split after such a loss, which, we can't blame them. Like, it's difficult. Every couple is different. The foundations of their relationship are different, but I'm just thankful, given what we've been through as a couple, where there have been seasons where like this should have broken us, this should have been like the last thing. It really just solidified things. Like, and even in times where we'll be in a huge argument, and even like, we'll jokingly, but in our frustration, be like, so should we consider, going our separate ways or something, even though we're not serious, but like that thought. And I'm like, I'm not going to split a picture of Gideon with you. Like, it's just not this.
I love that that's where your head goes. You're like, forget the fact that I'm really angry with you right now, but I'm not sharing my pictures.
Yeah, you're not keeping the bear. Like, I'm taking the bear. So Like, and I wouldn't want to do that to him too. So in a way, I feel like God has used that kind of dark humor to help us remember like what's important when we're having those, like when you compare it to that, it's like this is the most minuscule argument right now. So I am very grateful for that.
That's really beautiful to be able to have that 2020 vision hindsight, to say things wouldn't have happened the way it happened, and you might still be in that ministry and you might be even worse off if somehow Josiah had still been here. Of course, you would trade anything in the world to have him here, but at the same time, to know that you've learned so much is just, it's such a beautiful way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Tell me something that was really helpful following the loss, whether it was through Heal or through the Finley Project or something completely unrelated.
Um, well, aside from those two resources, another big one that I was somewhat aware of was stillbirthday.com. They had a ton of resources, and I had skimmed across their resources years ago as part of my birth work, just to like, oh, I might want to have some of that knowledge in the background, but I never thought like I would need it for myself. And so that they just have so many very practical resources and information on, from making a program for the funeral to like how to do a celebration of life to even as a birth worker, like what are ways to help preserve the body a little bit more of the baby so that you can view the baby in a better setting. I don't know how to better describe that, but like ways that you can care for it to protect the skin, that kind of stuff. And so there, as far as for, I would put that out there just for birth workers, of like that page is really helpful in educating me on like, okay, so in the future, these are things that I could do for a mom who maybe had a miscarriage and was able to see her baby. Like, what are ways that we can help her kind of honor that life and stuff? And so,
I think
yeah,
something
I would
like
say
that
those have been the biggest.
while I was in the hospital would have been such a good resource, because as a surrogate, I didn't know what the parents wanted to do. And it was so difficult. I was totally out of it, not knowing like, how do I preserve? Do I preserve? What do I need to ask them? What do the doctors need to do? None of that was addressed. So I think stillbirthday.com, fantastic resource to know about. And for anybody who might be going through a loss, definitely check it out.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, oh goodness, like I can't even imagine. One of the things that I appreciated, which is funny, like it's a completely different experience in the hospital. As you know, like as a doula, the kind of way you equip a mom and kind of educate her to prepare for her hospital birth, you go in like you're going to need to advocate for yourself. You need to, you kind of prep them for worst case scenarios. But when you're going in with like a loss, it was like the opposite. I had to be the one to be like, I need to leave. I will stay here forever. And if I don't make myself leave, they were so gracious to like, you can stay as long as you need to. We stayed. I had read something about like to try and stay at least 3 days if you can, and just have that time with your baby. Also, that was along the lines of stillbirthday as well, of like things to do with your baby. Even like I sang to him, I watched TV with him. Like it felt so morbid and so weird, but it was my, those were ways, the only ways that I had to make some memories with him. And my husband, even a few weeks ago, we were talking about that, and he's like, we had different experiences as far as our time with Gideon after he was born and stuff. And so for him, it was difficult for him to connect with Gideon's body physically. And it was understandable. I had similar reactions, but there was this part of me that was just like, I need to do this because I might look back and wish that I had, and I won't be able to. And so he remembered overhearing me singing like, I don't know, some kind of Coco Melon or something, The Wheels on the Bus, to Gideon. And it felt so stupid, but it was also like, if I didn't look at him and see, that he's not breathing, but I just, if I just took the moment to hold him and imagine that he's awake right now, and we're just having this postpartum beautiful moment, then I was able to kind of capture it in that way, and make those memories with him. And those are things that, like, because other people shared their stories of things that they did, I was able to, like, oh, I never would have thought of that. I'm going to do that, And we did have some time before, because I was induced, I didn't go into labor naturally. So I had about 24, 48 hours to kind of research and find out. And so that would be something I would encourage, just as someone, is either walking through a loss right now or knows someone, like, to, if they have a little bit of time in advance, to focus more on that. Don't focus on the funeral arrangements. Focus on, like, what can I do in the hours that I have with my baby to just bond, in the, as weird as it is, but to still do that and capture that.
And I think going back to what you said earlier about how you felt so embarrassed by holding the bear with the weight in it when you got home, none of this should be embarrassing. None of this is for anybody but you and your partner. And to know that you're doing things to make yourself, like, your brain needs to process it. And so you really, whatever you do is okay. If you want to hold your baby, hold your baby. And if you don't want to hold your baby, that's okay too, right? Like, there's no right or wrong way. And there's absolutely nothing that you should feel embarrassed by for doing something, that singing to your baby or watching TV with your baby or just sitting in the bed holding the baby and having your kids come in and be able to bond with them also. It's all okay.
Yeah. Yeah. There is no right or wrong kind of thing. And that, as someone who's very black and white about stuff, grief just wrecked all of that. And it brought this, like, this whole idea of, like, self-advocacy from the, not just, I'm used to self-advocacy from the perspective of, like, needing to defend myself, but self-advocacy from the point of, like, communicating my needs or allowing myself to respect that this is what I need, and that's
Right.
okay, and that I don't have to feel shame about that. And so, I've learned a lot. So that's another thing that I'm grateful for. But, it's taken time, a lot of
For
work.
sure. It takes a lot of time. And like we said before, grief will always be with you. It just evolves as you get farther away from the date. The last question I have is, if you have one piece of advice for the people listening, what would that be?
I guess my piece of advice would be what I've taken from the miscarriage and from Gideon's loss. It's just to cherish every second that you have. That is something you will never regret, being too much over the top with your baby or celebrating too much. I think especially those first 12 weeks, right? The 12 weeks where you get past that, everything's safe and sound, which we've learned that's not the case. So, like, we can tend to walk that time so, like, isolated and by ourselves. And and if that's best for you to, like, keep it to yourself, totally do that, but cherish it on your own too. Remember and celebrate, take the pictures even if no one ever sees them, like, because then you can look back and remember, oh, he was there. I wish I would have done that a little bit more, taken more pictures and more videos too. Like, there's things that my brain can't remember anymore. Like, I don't remember much of the pregnancy. And so those are things that, like, back in our parents' day, where they had the video camera and they'd go around, like, they caught those, where now it's like you're just getting more of the selfie look. You don't get that whole aspect. And so I wish I had some more of that to remember him by. But yeah, just cherishing it. And I saw a post yesterday that said, like, we make the habit of taking the fact that you left home and made it back safely for granted. And I was just like, oh, that is so true. Like, I'm so glad that I get to hug my child one more time, that I get to say I love you one more time. And, we're not promised tomorrow. We think we'll get it. We hope we get it, and likely we'll get it. But, it's not always that way. And we just don't know how quick. When we say live it to your fullest, not it being like going out and doing the wild thing that you want to do on your bucket list. Like, yeah, that's it to the fullest and being present. I have to really work on being present and not disassociating and just trying to get past things. And so those would be, I'd say, like my biggest advice.
I think that's perfect. I think that's such a good way to end, because to really appreciate what you have, which is one of the reasons why I ask what you're grateful for, because it really brings the moment to right now. And I always say you can't change what happened, but you can change your outlook on it. And to be able to appreciate what you do have, whether you have kids or whether you have a husband or whether you don't have any of that, there's still something, and there's still reason to live, and there's still reason to be here. So I think that's the perfect way to end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community for those who've experienced pregnancy loss. Remember, you are not alone in your journey, and there is strength within you to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's episode, please consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.